Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, dear panelists, my name is Jonas, and I'm part of this year's Symposium's organizing committee, responsible for Switzerland, and more importantly, today for food and beverage. So I hope you enjoyed your lunch. Thank you. While I don't wear a uniform at this conference, I serve outside of it as a first lieutenant and quartermaster of the Swiss Armed Forces, with very similar responsibilities. Making sure what's needed gets where it needs to be on time. In both roles, I've learned logistics are key. If people don't get what they need when they need it, things starting to fall apart, whether it's lunch at a conference or equipment on a mission. That's why I'm especially honored to open this panel, because the topic we're discussing today isn't abstract for me. It's something I've seen up close, and that has concerned me and many other young people the past year. When Russia invaded Ukraine, I was in basic training. I remember the briefing that morning just about 5 kilometers in Herisau, and it suddenly felt very real to me. The idea that Europe had left war behind was gone in a moment, and it wasn't just a feeling. It showed up in our training exercises. In the beginning of my service, we were preparing for irregular threats, like small militant groups. But by the end of my officer school, we were training against state actors, professional soldiers equipped like us. That shift says a lot about the seriousness of today's threats. From my perspective as a young officer, and as someone who, through my work at the symposium this year, has had many conversations on this very topic, one thing is clear. This new era is not just about bigger budgets or more equipment, it's also about a fundamental change in mindset. There's growing understanding in my generation that we can't take peace for granted, that Europe must take more responsibility, and that we, the next generation, are part of that very effort. And just as importantly, we must not let ourselves be discouraged. Yes, the challenges are very real, but they're also a call to act. European governments must now lay the groundwork to restore a sense of security, and in doing so, encourage the next generation to engage and take responsibility. I'm especially looking forward to hearing from the panel about the steps Europe is planning to take to give the younger generation a renewed sense of security and to inspire them to take an active role in safeguarding it. Thank you.
I need you to, yes.
Okay. We mix it all up. Change your name.
All right, be seated, gentlemen. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming in such great numbers to the last session of today's opening day of the St.Gallen Symposium. Jonas, now I can't see you anymore, but now, there you are. But I want to thank you for that moving opening, because it reminded me of something that I was thinking about when the Russian aggression against Ukraine was only 6 months old. Ben and I may have read the same study, but CIPRI came out with a study that said, if these kind of conflicts don't move toward a physical kinetic end within 6 months, on average, they take 15 years to resolve in the kinetic frame. And I did the math, maybe similar to your parents, Jonas, because I have a 6-year-old. And as we are thinking now about what that means in terms of structure, sacrifice, engagement, and we're having the discussions in Germany and elsewhere around Europe, what that means in terms of creating resilient and functional armed services, that also means potentially bringing back the draft, creating different structures for young people to serve and to serve in different ways. And so I think those are very real. So thank you for making that so vivid. I'm Cathryn Clüver Ashbrook. I'm Executive Vice President of the Bertelsmann Stiftung, and I have the pleasure of leading this conversation. I have a new norm at the St.Gallen Symposium, which is that these gentlemen will be asked a 1-minute response question at the beginning. But I want to set the tone a little bit because for this very topic, we find ourselves, of course, in a very historic week. Tomorrow marks the 80th anniversary of the liberation of this continent from the scourge of National Socialism. That's how we will mark it in Germany. In Berlin, it's a holiday. It's actually a public holiday. And on the 9th of May, there will be a big parade in Moscow, as there is every year. And invited to this parade are the elements that, in some respects, the leaders that in parlances are now being called the new axis of instability. Xi Jinping arrives for a 4-day visit to Moscow, where not only they will discuss their unlimited partnership in terms of potential support to ongoing conflict in Ukraine, but an energy partnership, a whole matter of things that support a surround that makes those actors more secure. And that is the world in which we find ourselves, and of course, a quick change in the United States with a very different approach to this conflict, but to European security in general. So that's what we're going to discuss here with you for 50 minutes on this stage, and then for 20 minutes with you. We want this to be an interactive session as much as we can, and then invite you into this conversation. But your 1-minute question, gentlemen, is so that we start from a point of common momentum, is what is the state truly of European security? All 4 of you have a different perspective on it in this very moment. And as you ponder that, so it's a diagnostic today in this historic week, I will introduce you to this audience. Sitting next to me is the EU Commissioner for Migration and Internal Affairs, Magnus Brunner, freshly into the College of Commissioners as of December of last year. It took a little while to get this College of Commissioners together, but you're here, and we're grateful for it. Prior to coming into this role, many of you will know he was finance minister for his home country, Austria. He looks at many of the questions that we will be discussing today from a truly integrated perspective, and that speaks to a portfolio he held previously, of course, on energy, environment, mobility, innovation, technology, and climate action. Welcome, Commissioner Brunner.
Thank you very much.
Next to him is somebody who, in this context, I barely need to introduce. He is, of course, the Chief of the Swiss Armed Forces, Lieutenant General Thomas Süssli. He's been in this role since January 2020, responsible for leading the Swiss Army, overseeing key commands, including Armed Forces Staff, Logistics, Joint Operations Command, all the things that make an armed forces work. He was immediately prior Major General of the Armed Forces Command Support Organization. But, and I love this as a Swiss biography, it's such a Swiss biography, before his military leadership roles, Jonas, take note, he gained extensive experience in the private sector. And of course, financial flows are a major issue now when it comes to securing our diverse countries, including as CEO of Von Tobel Financial Products. And I'm not sure if anybody in Switzerland gets to leave Switzerland without a job at UBS. So there was also a senior role at UBS there. Christoph Heusgen, in this context, I think has been introduced 4 times today, but is now the co-chair of the St.Gallen Symposium, was until very recently in a moving end to his time of service at the Munich Security Conference. I feel very honored, Christoph, that I got to attend every one of the Munich Security Conferences that you chaired, because among Christoph's greatest achievements is that he truly widened the aperture of what it means to think about security in a global context, not only geographically, regionally, but also substantively. And I and many, many hundreds of others that fit into the Bayerische Hof somehow magically every February are grateful for it. Many of you know that Christoph Heusgen was, of course, the ambassador of the Federal Republic of Germany to the United Nations, in a difficult time for the United Nations, by the way, and then was for a long time the diplomatic right-hand man to former Chancellor Angela Merkel, was part and supporting role in the Minsk negotiations. We'll talk about diplomacy in Ukraine as well, but began his life with a European perspective, working very closely with Javier Solana. So welcome home, Christoph, to your alma mater. And last but certainly not least is General Ben, as we now call him casually, but maybe in the parlance, you've become such a fixture in these discussions. But General Ben Hodges, who was the commanding general of the United States Army in Europe, based in my hometown, Wiesbaden, which always makes me particularly proud. Welcome back to St.Gallen, because we were here together last year. He was the commanding general, as I said, of the US Army in Europe, but also commander of NATO Allied Land Command in Izmir, Turkey. He is now in various different civil service roles, by the way. NATO Senior Mentor for Logistics, a distinguished fellow at GlobSec. Big humanitarian engagement profile also from you, General Ben. You served as Pershing Chair in Strategic Studies at SIPA, but you are on a number of nonprofit boards, including as Senior Advisor to Human Rights First. So I think I filibustered long enough, gentlemen. Now it's time to get down to brass tacks. I'm going to start with you, Ben. What is the state of European security, widely spoken, right now, May 7th?
Well, first of all, I hate that people question America's commitment to Europe, which is why this question comes up. What is the state of European security? Because people have lost confidence or they're uncertain about America's commitment to Europe. And so I hate that that's even a question, but it's a fair question. And certainly our president has demanded, as have all of his predecessors, that Europe must be prepared to defend itself more, not because we want to punish you, but because we don't have enough capability to cover everything that has to be covered. So it's fair to expect allies to do more. But I would say that Europe has more than enough industry, people, diplomatic power, and indeed military power if it works together. The only thing that is lacking from a totally secure Europe is self-confidence on the part of Europeans. What you have dwarfs Russia. That's not even close. In terms of industry, military capability, you dwarf Russia. You lack self-confidence.
We're going to ask just how that self-confidence is motivated, and then how we frankly get machinery and what we need into rotation, shall we say, in a third round. Christoph, what's the state of European security today?
I want to follow up to what Ben just said. We have had many moments in the past where we said, okay, finally the hour of Europe is there, we are going to do it, and I hate to repeat that again. But I think Ben is right. We need the self-confidence, we have the capabilities, we have to have the political leadership that also then draws the population. And I'm optimistic. We have, you said tomorrow the 8th, and what happened on the 9th in Moscow. Today, we have the 7th. Today, Chancellor Merz was in Paris. What I hear and read was an excellent meeting. German-French relations will work. This afternoon he's in Warsaw. German-Polish relations, the Weimar Triangle, will work, I'm sure, better than in the past. This is a core in the European Union that has to work, of course, with all partners. But if the core doesn't work, it works. One of the signs that I think that they are serious is that finally, the German Chancellor, took up the proposal by the French president to talk about nuclear deterrence, to talk about, how can Europe benefit from what the French and, by the way, also the British have, and talk about, in complement to the American tactical nuclear weapons that we have, about a European nuclear umbrella. And this is for me a signal. Yes, they have understood the message, and I'm optimistic going from here.
From a Swiss perspective, from the perspective of neutrality, and yet right at the heart of, surrounded by Europe in the European continent with the same threat portfolio, what's the state of European security, Lieutenant General?
I think we have been asked by the US ambassador to Switzerland to not be the hole in the donut. And we took that very seriously, and also that ambassador has been criticized very much, but I think he's right. For Switzerland, it's the same for the rest of Europe. We have to strengthen our defense capability. However, I think compared to also compared to Europe, we woke up on 24th of February 22, but then we put the alarm clock to snooze and fell asleep again.
Right.
Maybe like others. And what we're in right now, what the big concern right now is with like Russia threatening Europe and Europe being already in a hybrid war with Russia. That's what our intelligence service director says. We have to make sure that we can credibly prove that we are ready to defend ourselves, and that's the big issue. And the rest of Europe, we have the same issues. It's very difficult to buy military gear. The defense industry is not there yet. It's difficult to buy ammunition, everything. So we're in the same boat as the rest of Europe, but it's fair to say we're not ready today.
Well, we just heard about the series of hybrid threats that already exist, so that's a perfect segue to you, Commissioner Brunner. What's the state of European security today?
Well, I think we're not ready yet. Yes, you're right, but we woke up. We understood, I think, and we completely changed our approach also towards security altogether. And I think that is reflected and we delivered in the first 100 days already on a white paper of defense, preparedness strategy, internal security strategy, because we know that we had to do something. And I think security plays now a very important role in all different files. We've got our security college where we are debriefed and briefed by the intelligence services because we know it's important, and the security plays an important role in be it infrastructure, be it energy, being economy, the whole economy altogether. So I think we did understand. We woke up. We had to wake up, to be honest. And we also see that the lines between the external dimension and the external security and the internal security is very blurred.
Right.
Actually, so I think we understood, and that's what we try to do and try to work on every day.
We'll go deeper into that threat portfolio, but because of what we're facing in this week or how we're thinking about this week, all four of you have spoken with some optimism about what Europe is capable of, but in the immediate resolution of what is happening in the field of war in Ukraine and in the diplomacy surrounding it, and this is where I want to come straight to you, Christoph, Europe seems to be locked out of the game. Because when you look at the pictures of the diplomacy going on, whether it's Steve Witkoff speaking to the Russians or President Trump huddling with President Zelensky after he first ground him down, frankly, talked down to him in the Oval Office, to what is fundamentally an ally. I mean, Ukraine has been the linchpin of European security since before World War I, by the way. Where are we? Where are the Europeans? In Minsk, we had a major carrying role. We can talk about whether that was successful or not, but where are we in the diplomacy of solving the fundamental security challenge in our continent?
Well, first of all, I was not surprised that all the efforts that everybody praised, where everybody said, well, why is Europe not on the table? That is what President Trump tried, what Witkoff tried, what Rubio and there were some others tried. Looking at what the US administration was presenting and looking at their knowledge about Russia, I didn't expect much, and nothing came out with regard to the war. I mean, this new agreement on Ukrainian raw materials is nice to have, but it doesn't change anything on the war. So, we were not there on the table, but nothing came out. So, we don't have to ask Trump, please let us sit on the table. We have to have a European position. We have to react from a position of strength.
Yep.
This is the only thing that Putin accepts. Just to say, well, why don't you think we should negotiate and can't we be nice? I think this doesn't work. The only thing that Putin accepts is strength. And there, we Europeans now have to get our act together. The German Chancellor, when he was still candidate, said, for instance, I'm ready to send these cruise missiles, these Taurus missiles that the former government refused to send, and said, but we're going to do that together. Mm-hmm. Why not have the Europeans, I would, by the way, also include the Brits there, why don't we sit together and say, okay, we put this package this way, we do such and such and such, and then we say, okay, we're going to do that to Ukraine, and by the way, Putin, are you interested to discuss that with us? a position of strength. And who said that at the very beginning? You said it. I mean, if we Europeans put our means together, I mean, there's no way that Putin matches us. We don't get our act together. We are badly organized. Political will is lacking. Population is skeptical. But if we have this determination, we can win this. But this is the only thing that Putin accepts. This is a position of strength. And in this, we have to get to this position. And let's be optimistic that we'll do that.
So 2 questions that spin off of Christoph's statement there, Ben. Does that put us at odds with the Americans right away? Does that put the Europeans at odds with the Americans right away? Because the Americans are pursuing a specific approach that seems, at least at this point, as we're speaking here, very concessionary to the Russian Federation. So it turns around the diplomatic strategy that Christoph has just formulated for the Europeans. So what does that do to the transatlantic relationship? Like, where do we run up against there? And explain to us what the American strategy is with respect to this concessionary attitude, whether it's the tariffs or whether it's all matter of other things, not going after the shadow fleet after we've announced that we're going after the shadow fleet. Sorry, this is where my pronouns get confused, and I'm American and European at the same time. So after Witkoff announced that we were going after the shadow fleet, we were going to keep sanctions in a back pocket so that you're forcing the Russians to the table. Where is that strategy?
Okay, so the Trump administration's approach, unfortunately, was doomed from the beginning because it was based on a complete failure to appreciate the cause of the war, the culture, the geography, the history,
right,
why it matters. That 26th February when President Zelensky was in the Oval Office, one of the worst days of my life, watching that humiliation of a president of a democratic country by the American president and the vice president, who was even worse. That was difficult to watch. But they demonstrated when the president says, "You got no cards," it shows that he doesn't even understand why people fight, why Ukraine is fighting. I mean, you could say that the Taliban had no cards, but they defeated us, or the Viet Cong had no cards, but they defeated us. So it's not about numbers. So that's part one. Secondly, and of course I'm in the presence of one of Europe's greatest diplomats, the way that the Trump administration organized for this, you've got Witkoff, Kellogg, Rubio, and none of the 3 of them are working together
right,
in sync. And then no matter what they did, the president would say something that was totally unrelated. And so I think that was the problem. The fact that, and I appreciate what you said also about not having a seat at the table. The reason Europe didn't have a seat at the table is because the president has zero respect for Europe. Mm-hmm. He's not going to invite Europe to participate because he has no respect. Now, part of that's his own weakness, but also part of it is the fact that Europe doesn't represent a serious contributor to it, at least in the eyes of how he looks at it.
Right.
Now, what Radek Sikorski said in February, he said, you know, we're not going to be invited. We have to get wood and build our own table. Mm-hmm. You know, get in there. And Europe, of course, is not obligated to accept whatever the outcome of these negotiations are, nor is Ukraine, actually, because this is White House to the Kremlin. So finally, they also failed to appreciate until just now, Vladimir Putin has zero interest in actually a negotiated outcome. Mm-hmm. As long as he lives, he is never going to accept anything. Let me say it differently. As long as he is in power, he is never going to accept anything other than the destruction of Ukraine and the idea of Ukraine as a sovereign state. And so unless all of us together say, look, this is what's going to happen, then he will play this out as long as he can.
So the timeline of how that works and what methods he might use and what our deterrent answers will be is what we'll talk about in the remaining time. But Lieutenant General Süssli, the United States president doesn't seemingly have a lot of respect for European partners in NATO, certainly not for parts of the European Union. But still, Switzerland becomes the avenue for diplomacy, not only on this, but of course, we have a delegation coming together in Geneva to look at the trade and tariff fiasco that the White House created in the world in a day and a half, 2 days. from now. But as a senior figure in the army, you must be looking at possibilities of how conflict ends and their diplomacy takes primacy. What's your read on the current state of diplomacy here, and what would you like to see the role that Europe should be playing now, separate, second track?
I'm not going to comment on Europe, but Switzerland used to be, as a neutral country, used to be a platform for negotiations, also, for instance, for the Minsk Accord at that time. And what Switzerland actually is looking forward or is intending to do is provide such a platform next year when we have the presidency of the OSCE.
Yep.
And probably the goal might be, or the hope might be, to repeat what we did with the Minsk Accord at that time and provide a platform for negotiations. So that's a good opportunity. But other than that, I very much agree with General Ben Hodges, that actually Russia doesn't seem to be interested in negotiating it, because historically a war ends either when one party is stronger and wins, or other than that, both sides run out of resources, and that's not yet the case. So that might be difficult actually to get both parties, or at least minimum both parties at the table.
But of course, Russia has learned from all the different incursions it has fought effectively since, well, the memorable speech at the MSC in 2007, when we then saw, this escalade, this going through Georgia, going through the different provocations, picking out the color revolutions, and then rolling hybrid actions into them, rolling propaganda issues into them, in parts running territorial incursions, not least, of course, the 2014 invasion of Crimea. And that brings me to you, Commissioner Brunner. We heard, right away from the Russian Federation that, of course, if the military components are stepped up from the European side or the American side, or if we get to, let me start with this, if we get to territorial concessions, even in some way, shape, or form that, all three of you have basically said are going to be impossible for all other reasons, then there's immediate knock-on effects for Europe. We'll have another large migratory wave that's entirely your envelope, and the hybrid components of the actions that the Russian Federation is taking as a state actor against our integrated security issues. Maritime, so cable security, data infrastructure, disinformation, of course. The polls just uncovered a massive disinformation campaign by the Russian Federation against the Polish presidential election. Will that continue? How will that continue? How ready are we to counter that, the migration pressures and the other issues? How are we preparing for that?
Well, you mentioned a lot of different topics concerning a lot actually, but you're right. You're perfectly right. There are a lot of threats, of course, a lot of challenges, and we have to change our view on security altogether because of these hybrid threats you were mentioning and others. What is our response to that? First of all, combating the hybrid threats. That is something very serious. I've just been to the Polish-Belarus border last week, and we see that Russia and Belarus, they actually, in former times they used energy as a hybrid weapon against Europe, and now they're even using migrants. They're using people to fight Europe, and that's something, of course, which worries us a lot, and where we have to be prepared, better prepared. And that's what we're doing with our internal security strategy, where the hybrid threats play quite an important part. Also, when it comes to the cyber part, also when it comes to access to data, for instance, that plays also an important role. More possibilities for law enforcement agencies, and then talking about agencies, of course, it's a lot about strengthening Europol, strengthening Frontex also. At the outside borders, at the external borders, to be prepared at the end of the day.
Let's stay on the migration piece for a minute, because if what you're describing, or what could be possible, effectively the weaponization of migration, that's a pattern that we've seen. So you'd think that we have more acute ways of countering that, and yet internal to the European Union, everybody is offering some sort of potential violation of the existing system, which is to say that national politicians are saying, look, we can shut down borders, we can run who gets access to our country. That would be a massive refugee situation, potentially. So more concretely, how are you preparing for continued outflows and potentially migratory waves?
Well, I can speak for the internal European situation, and we have to bring and put our European house in order first. That's the first step we have to take. That's what we did with the Pact on Asylum and Migration. I think that's a very good basis. We have to manage migration better, in a better way, in a more professional way. Also having some flexibility for the member states, being more effective and efficient. That was the first thing. But it's only a basis, and we had some missing pieces in there, like the returns, for instance. Only 1 out of 5 people who have no right to stay in the European Union are being returned, which is just not acceptable in a way. That's why we presented the return regulation as well. That was the second step. But that's all only bringing our internal European house in order. And now the next step has to be the external dimension, working together with third countries. That is, I think, something very important when it comes to migration, because we need at the end someone who takes the people back who are illegally or irregularly within the European Union. So that will be the next step to work on the external dimension and the also cooperation with third countries.
Now, of course, the Ukrainians are a different situation. They would be refugees. But they still need to be integrated. It raises all manner of connected effects with respect to the general resilience of our cities, our capacities to accommodate major refugee populations. We also know, and David Miliband says this every time, once people are displaced, it generally takes them about 20 years to go back if they're displaced by massive conflict. That changes certain impacts and issues on demographics, integration, functionality,
definitely.
Public services.
Talk about demography and Ukraine, because you were mentioning Ukraine. That's a different situation, yes. Of course. That's not a normal, I would say, migration situation. We've got this temporary protection directive on a European level, which supports, of course, Ukrainian citizens who had to leave. But on the other hand, we have got the situation that the Ukrainians desperately want their people back. So they are not very much in favor, actually, of prolonging this temporary protection directive until whatever, 2027, because they say we desperately need them back once there is peace, if there is peace at one stage, and when, yeah. But we have to be more flexible on that as well, because the demography side in the Ukraine is very, very alarming, I would say. They lost people because of the demography and the demographic situation, but also, of course, because of the war. And they desperately need them to rebuild the country.
I want to stay on this hybrid and integrated threat bit. Ben, well, first of all, we had a very surprising, to me at least, piece exclusive in the Washington Post yesterday saying that not only are we have a minerals agreement, but now the Trump administration is putting pressure on Ukraine to take deportees from the United States. They're not just going to El Salvador, they might be going to Ukraine, which I don't see the logic of and find truly harrowing. But the other piece was that Dmitry Peskov said after the Biden administration gave the green light on the ATACMS, he said, okay, well, that means that American military bases in Europe could be targets for intervention. This reminds me of how I grew up in the 1980s in part of a military community. And other parts of critical infrastructure in Europe is now up for grabs. What have you seen there? What do you expect could come? And how should European allies be preparing?
Well, I think the administration is talking about deportees to Libya, not Ukraine.
No, Ukraine is the Washington Post piece from last night. Okay,
well, I would certainly defer to you. I think it's great. If they get more troops, if that helps Ukraine, I'm all for it. No, look, I'm joking. I don't like the word hybrid because it prevents us from finding solutions. Mm-hmm. When you say, well, this is hybrid warfare, it doesn't sound so bad.
Right.
It sounds not so harmful, almost like, oh, they shouldn't do that, but instead, the Russians are always at war.
Yep.
They do something along the spectrum from disinformation, murder in Tiergarten, destroying underwater infrastructure, trying to blow up a DHL airplane, to nuclear weapon or threatening the use of nuclear weapon. I mean, the other day, about 3 days ago, President Putin said, I hope we don't need to use a nuclear weapon. What a bullshit statement. He does not need to use a nuclear weapon. But he says that so that everybody goes, oh my God, they have nuclear weapons. Mm-hmm. He's thinking about he might have to use them. There's zero reason for Russia to ever use a nuclear weapon unless we invade Russia. There's zero reason. There's no place that they could use it that would help them in Ukraine, for example. So all of these things that they do, because we tend to package it as hybrid, we don't figure out how to react. What they do in the Baltic Sea, I think President Stubb of Finland, he gets it. He's not confused about what's going on. And so he summoned or invited all the leaders of every country around the Baltic Sea to Helsinki back in late January, I think, and said, we got to do something here. Right. And Secretary General Rutte was there. And so they agreed, we've got to increase, surveillance. We've got to be willing to go out and grab these ships that are probably in violation of insurance, environmental safety, all these things. But if you keep calling it hybrid, we will keep wringing our hands, oh, that's really bad that, that they're doing these things. So this is war. Mm-hmm. They're at war. Mm-hmm. We need to act like we are at war with them. Otherwise, they're just going to keep laughing at us and doing this.
Christoph, does it need a new set of actors doing the diplomatic diagnosis? Because Ben didn't say this, but any cyber ransomware sabotage costs the German economy $267 billion every year, up by 30% year on year. And the Munich Security Conference has done a tremendous job of bringing business leaders into contact with the policymakers who write massive plans to protect the EU from the inside. When businesses are seeing this every single day, and in their risk, in looking at their value chains and making risk decisions, they're the seismographs of feeling where it comes from, and oftentimes they have to find the quick kind of solution. So on this continued front, it's not only Russia, by the way, of course, that's China as a state actor, and then there's a whole set of dark, nefarious actors who are going after our security interests. What does a nexus look like there between business and government to keep us safer?
Yes. I mean, you alluded at the beginning at the Munich Security Conference where we took this comprehensive view of security, because all of this falls together. Also, what the commissioner said with regard to migration, he was in Belarus, he knows on the border what they are doing. So they are very systematically, and we have to respond to it systematically. I agree with Ben, this is not, hybrid. This sounds like, something artificial and not really to grasp. Yeah. No, you can grasp that. Yeah. So you have to look at that, you have to look comparatively. Again, I'm optimist looking at the new German government. We finally in Germany get a National Security Council. Mm-hmm. And I don't know exactly how it will be set up, but we have to look at all these threats to, of course, the obvious ones, but then also the hybrid threats to infrastructure, to the cyber attacks, migration, what we get left and right, and we have to look at that. The Russians are very good at that. They have one narrative, they have one center of decisions, and they're doing it, and they look at that, and so we have to impress them and we call your bluff, or we call your shots, and react to it.
I mean, it's really a wound for European businesses. This is a Bitkom study, and it looks only at the German businesses, but on a European scale, it must be even larger. So with Protect EU, are you enabling other actors to continue to invest in their own security, or what is your aim in that sort of insulation piece, in that security piece?
Well, with the Protect EU, our internal security strategy, that's actually one piece out of the three I was mentioning in the beginning. With the white paper of defense, where the focus is on defense, of course, and the preparedness strategy, because you were mentioning President Stubb, and Finland is one of the front runners of being prepared, which is also a very important cornerstone. And then the security strategy altogether. The security strategy has different approaches on a legal basis also when it comes to, it's not only migration, of course, it's a lot about organized crime, fighting organized crime, following the money, and other things. So there are some legal possibilities there. Another thing is the defense part and how to spend on the defense. That's in the white paper of defense.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in just a second. This is all an integrated resilience question, effectively. How's Switzerland thinking about its integrated resilience capacities?
I mean, maybe just to come back a bit on hybrid war, and then I'm going to answer the question about resilience. But then the big question actually is, I mean, in military terms, we define strategy as ends, ways, and means. Mm-hmm. And the big question is, what is the end for Russia? What's their purpose and what's the goal? And we see the goal as a disintegrated, split, and destabilized Europe.
Of course, yeah.
And one of the ways actually is hybrid. And hybrid, actually I fully agree, is dangerous because there is no clear definition of what is hybrid. Mm-hmm. It consists of cyber attacks, disinformation, destabilization. And means then, and you mentioned one of the means, is actually weaponizing refugees. So, but then what it means, and very important, even a hybrid war is a war. I think Estonia mentioned that, rightfully mentioned that very clearly. If we're attacked in a hybrid way, it's still, we are being attacked. Yeah. So how can you counter hybrid attacks? And you mentioned it. One is resilience and one is durability, but what it really needs is like a whole of government approach. So hybrid cannot be answered by military forces. It needs everything. It needs civilian protection. It needs protection against cyber attack. It needs also defense against threats from distance, like missiles, etc. So it's a whole of government approach, and that is what is required. And the armed forces actually, they can help to increase resilience and durability.
Well, and in part also through visibility. I mean, if you're at any Swedish marketplace at any time that I've been to Sweden in the last 6 months, when the war is already 3 years old, the Swedish army is out there working on sort of integrated resilience, preparedness. What do you have at home? How do you individually think about your own security? We maybe need a National Security Council to really formulate that in the German context, but we will see. But this idea of safe spaces is actually in the preamble of the German coalition contract. We have to go back to hard security one more time before we turn it over to the audience. And look at the kinetic dimension. All of you have mentioned the fact that we're well-resourced. We have the industry. To be frank, now finally the contracts are running. Industry is buzzing. If you are buying stock, by the way, of course, buying stock in defense industry right now is a way to make money in volatile times. And yet, Ben, the truth of the matter is, it's not happening fast enough in a way that the deterrent sending mechanism, you know, the credibility of an integrated defense seems to be arriving in Moscow such that the signaling is strong enough. Or is it strong enough?
You know, every defense minister's job is to ensure that the armed forces under him or her are ready. So we tend to talk about we've got to buy more equipment, modernization, which is obviously an important part of it, but the most important thing is making sure that the women and men under command are ready to do their job, that the ranks are full, they're trained, there's ammunition and fuel for exercises as well as for war stocks. We call it readiness or Einsatzbereitschaft. You're ready to do the task. That's got to be job one. That doesn't mean you don't need new equipment, but this is the task first. The culture that we had in the Cold War, when I was a lieutenant in West Germany in 1981, I think you were in kindergarten at that time, but it was
not wrong.
Fight tonight, be prepared to fight tonight. Mm-hmm. And so it was a mentality. Friday afternoon, if your vehicle was still not repaired, you couldn't go home. You stayed in the motor pool all weekend until your vehicle was ready because the Soviets may attack on Saturday or Sunday, or what. That was the mentality. And I think this is something that our allies have got to recapture. And also, I would look at the legislation in Germany in particular, but I suspect this is true in other countries. German defense industry cannot lean forward and anticipate requirements
until the contract.
Until they get an order from the Regierung saying, we need 50,000 of whatever.
Right.
So that'll never work in business if you have to wait versus anticipating a requirement, taking some risk, and you don't have to be a genius to see that there's going to be a huge requirement for ammunition, parts, et cetera. And then the third thing I would say is priorities. The EDA would tell you that about 50%, the European Defense Agency would tell you that about 50% of the ammunition produced in Europe today goes to Uganda, UAE, customers in Africa and the Middle East. So there is capacity. What's the priority? The United States, we even asked Switzerland to allow Ukraine to get in front of them to receive Patriot.
Right.
Because of a priority. And of course, the Swiss were willing to accept that. And I think European governments could protect their industry from liability by talking to their customers in Africa and the Middle East, say, hey, look, we'll eventually get to you, but the priority now is Ukraine and making sure that we have filled our own stocks. So it's not capacity, it's priority.
And modernization. There's a big piece on Poland. Poland that is the leader in defense spending in the European Union that's still struggling to get its machinery up and running so that they're at production level. But this goes straight back to you, Commissioner Brunner, of course, on precisely this piece. I mean, ESG guidelines, to be fair, and this is an MSC moment too, I remember this distinctly, Natalie Tocci asking Josep Borrell, where is this peace facility you've been talking about? And he said, well, it's not ready, and 10 days later it was ready. You can say a lot of terrible things about the European Union, but that they haven't been inventive and in getting things out the door and changing their procedures and changing their own financial allocations. We have a peace facility that is actively engaging in financial transactions so that delivery on Ukrainian front lines is possible. So what more can we be doing on the European level to give it that lift?
Well, we have to work on that every day, and we did a lot, as you mentioned. I think also things like the guidelines for the EIB, for instance, that they can invest in defense, in ammunition, and whatever. Austria was a bit reluctant, being a neutral country. We have got different approaches on that, but even Austria is now in favor of that. So changing the guidelines, changing the rules for that is, I think, important to make it possible. Maybe just one sentence on the hybrid word hybrid. I don't see it that negative. I do understand, of course, your points, but that's our sort of point to explain it to the public that hybrid threat is, or hybrid warfare is nothing nice. Of course not. It's part of it is still a threat. It is still a war we are facing. But I also prefer the word weaponization when it comes to migrants, to people, to other things. I think weaponization is a stronger word. We were discussing that for quite a long time, actually, which word we should use, be it hybrid, be it afterwards weaponization. I think weaponization is very strong, and that was actually also discussed with Finland, with the Baltic states, with Poland, for instance. And you were mentioning how much is being invested by the member states also. Poland is doing a great job with 4.8% of their GDP. In Austria, we are at 0.8, and I was criticized as a Minister of Finance to raise it up to 1.2. So we see the discussions in the different member states are completely different, and especially those countries which are most affected by the Russian aggression, Poland, the Baltic states, Finland, the discussion in public is completely different. And that's our problem, our challenge as a European Union also, that we see the threats differently. Of course, the ones at the Russian border, they know what they're talking about, right. And they know Baltics, where to invest. Same. But if you talk to a Portuguese colleague or a Spanish colleague, he has a completely different mindset. And that's where we have to work on, I think, as a European Union to also bring it into the heads of the Portuguese and the Spanish that there is a danger from that side.
Well, the Germans are closer to the front line, but I want to ask Christoph about this whole piece around mobilization. There was a piece, I don't know, in the Spiegel or the Zeit last week, where it was a headline where the German army is looking for its reservists, and it said, unbekannt verzogen, so that people are no longer responding to the mail they get from the armed services to come in, renew their training, and be ready. And then we've had a series of young people. Jonas is, I think, among one of the great exceptions, young Germans that have gotten up in public to say, I don't see the need to defend this country. Why should I be defending this country? That seems to call for an entire ethos change so that we're getting closer to what Ben has. And this despite the fact that the memories of the Fulda Gap are not all that gone in Germany. So even in terms of that kind of preparedness, brigade in Lithuania is one thing, but what do we do at home?
Yes, it's a challenge. We grew up in Germany after the Second World War, where we were the cause for 6 million Jews being killed, 20 million people on the territory of the Soviet Union. We were for this worst of wars ever, and so the post-war generation was traumatized and said never again, and there was no readiness to actually go again to get Germans under arms. Now, we then finally did in the Cold War, we're ready to participate, and we did participate in the deterrence, and this worked out, and it was a long process, but it worked out. But then again came, of course, the miracle of the fall of the Berlin Wall, the Iron Curtain. We thought that that would be forever peace. We started to gradually disarm. Less and less people were actually in the conscription army being called, and then we got rid of conscription. And at a moment, 2011, when Vladimir Putin was just re-elected, biggest demonstrations against the guy. This is when he started this idea to launch nationalism, and then it took so long until today to get this mindset set again. So what do you need? You need, number one, leadership. If the leadership says, well, somehow we don't need military, we don't need to spend that much, then it's not going to work. So you need leadership. Number two, you need to talk and convince people. We did with the Munich Security Conference. I don't know if you participated. We did a tour in Germany, which called Zeitenwende on Tour.
Where I did. I was all the way in Friedrichshafen, the most southern tip of Germany. Friedrichshafen,
which is not that far here. So 35 cities where we tried to explain that. But it's a lot of work. We have now the discussion in Germany about conscription army. I think when you have that, it is very good. We have two countries that got into my mind, Switzerland and Finland. Also, when you look at the World Happiness Index, Finland is on top and Switzerland is also pretty close. So this doesn't speak against conscription army. And I think what we need somehow...
We're going to ask him if the happiness is linked to conscription. But
so
okay.
I don't know if there's a direct link. You're very happy when you're in conscription army, no? But in any case, what we need is this understanding. And I think that German federal president has made a couple of years ago the proposal that in Germany we need to go back to a mandatory year of young people to go and engage in social, communal, military, whatever activities, so that you invest time into your country, you invest time into society, and I think that would be something that would be very, very helpful. Conscription army. The generals are better. I mean, you have your example. I'm not that convinced because you would need to build new camps so you need the trainers and everything. It's a lot of work. What we need is specialists, people who electronic warfare, who work with drones. So I think we need to get more people, but we have to do it in a more different way than right now. Conscription doesn't work. But this sense of we have to work for our country, it's worth to defend our country, our free societies. This is something that we have to get in there. And when I see, you know, we had the student here, but also, you know, being here now as a new co-chairman, I see the engagement of the students, you know, they don't get any money for free, 4 days, they work from morning to night with, you know, when you see how they do it, you become proud of the young generation. So I'm optimistic that our societies in the end can deliver on service for our societies, for our communities. So, but we need leadership and this trust that yes, we can do it, you know.
And of course, other deterrent qualities that don't make the Fulda Gap vulnerable, so that we need lots of manpower, but that's maybe for our conversation. Is it because of conscription that everybody in Switzerland is so happy?
Actually, I'm quite happy we never gave it up. When we go back in year 2000 or 2010, many of our neighbors actually suspended conscription. We never did. Maybe because we're Swiss, we have the reputation, at least in Germany, being a bit slow. Maybe because we're a bit slow. I'm happy we didn't. We still have an armed force of 140,000 conscripts. Comparably, Germany has a professional armed force of 180,000. So compared to the size of a country, it's quite a big armed force. We're capable still of mobilizing 35,000 in 10 days. So that's something. And sure, conscripts are not on the same level as professionals, but we just had an exercise in Austria, in Allensteig. We had 1,000 volunteers, because for Swiss conscripts, they have to go, when they go abroad, it has to be on a volunteer basis. We had 1,000 going to Austria, doing an exercise with Austria and Germany. And I was very proud, actually, of our conscripts. And mentioning EW and cyber and all those capabilities, it's also important to understand the conscripts, they bring their civilian knowledge to the armed force. So we have cyber specialists naturally in our armed force, or maybe not EW specialists, but still I'm convinced it's one of the best systems for Switzerland, and we're very happy and proud we still have it.
Okay, we're about to come to your questions, so get your hands ready. We have some microphones. I assume we're going to have you introduce yourself and end with a question mark. I just want to, before we go to you, I want one quick answer out of all of you, because all of you have implied, rightly or wrongly, that the United States is perhaps an unreliable partner for Europe at this moment. But then, of course, there are other partners around the world, other large democracies, some of whom are already very engaged in NATO structures, South Korea, Australia, others. What other partners should Europe be looking toward in terms of their integrated security ambitions when we have a hot war in the middle of the continent? Commissioner Brunner.
Well, we're looking for a lot of different cooperation with different regions in the world at the moment, maybe more than we did before this administration came into office. We're looking especially on the fighting organized crime. We're working with the Latin American countries quite closely. There are a lot of cooperation between Europol and those countries. But we're also looking into India, for instance, a very important partner as well, not only in trade, but also when it comes to security. And Egypt, for instance, that what I said with the third countries, we need not only for migration, but also when it comes to security altogether. So the Northern African countries are also very important for us. So more cooperation with third countries. I think that's important. We need a sort of security diplomacy, I would say, and put security as a European Union, put security and also put migration on the table, on the diplomatic table as well.
Integrated security diplomacy, Christoph Heusgen, right up your alley. So if the United States will still buy arms from them, but maybe in diplomatic terms more difficult, who else are we partnering with on core threats?
Oh, you already mentioned the partners. I think that right now the European Commission is doing, I think, a fantastic work also economically, trying to get more free trade agreement worldwide. You know, these are all partners, and there are many. I was a UN ambassador, and I felt that there are so many countries, mid-sized countries, said, well, we don't want to be bullied around by the big ones, and now let's work together. The former, not the last one, but the one before, German foreign minister had created an alliance for multilateralism.
Right.
You know? These are countries, I think Bertelsmann was engaged with this at the time, and to launch it. And I think we have to look around all continents This is not only on security issues. This is also on issues of migration, economic issues, and I think what we see right now, the assault on international law, what I said this morning also, when people don't go by the UN Charter anymore, but there is a counterbalance, and countries now say, okay, we have to stand up and work together. So it's a wake-up call for many countries in Europe and beyond.
Okay. I am going to go to questions now. I see one right here in the second row in the center. Please introduce yourself, sir. And
yeah, thank you. My name is Rajiv Kaul from Calcutta, and my question is to General Ben Hodges, who I've had the pleasure of not meeting, but hearing him and his comments on DW, on Sky News, and many other channels. So, General, my question is, if you had to spend half an hour with Zelensky, President Zelensky, what advice would you give him to deal with A, the situation overall, and B, more specifically, with President Trump?
Great. Well, hold your fire. We're going to take one more, if we can, here in the front row, the young woman in the front row. And then we're going to take one more after that. So we're going to work in pockets of threes.
Hi, hello everyone. My name is Francesca Romana D'Antuono. I'm the co-president of Alta Europa. My question is to Commissioner Brunner. I promise it ends with a question mark, but I wanted to paint a picture before a little bit. So the Asylum and Migration Pact, the new pact, creates detention-like conditions for migrants. It also criminalizes the work of NGOs in the context of lack of legal ways for people to come to Europe, and also being paid by taxpayers money in an aging continent. And the deals with third countries happen when we know that in the detention centers, people seek suicide way more than is normal. They are sedated, they're offered rotten food. This has already happened in Albania, where the Meloni government opened detention centers. We also have reports like the Olaf report for 2022 that has exposed the violence of Frontex, the pushbacks. And there are countries like my own country, which again is Italy, who made deals with the Libyan Coast Guard, which is not really a Coast Guard, but we know that people are either enslaved or tortured. So I have three questions, and they are, first of all, I don't understand how all of this can look like security. How can we expect people not to radicalize? And how all of this, how all of this can be considered a hybrid threat from third countries and not something that we actually make to ourselves, because we are making ourselves vulnerable from other countries.
Thank you for that question. I have one more question over here in the dark. The young man in there, second row. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Kevin Riel. I'm a PhD student at ETH Zurich, and I have a question maybe shared with Thomas Süssli and Magnus Brunner. I'm 29 years old. I've never experienced a war, and I might be naive, but I believe that the people are not interested in any war, neither in Russia nor in Europe. It's rather political elites or economic elites that might create this. And my question to you is, you mentioned two options that a war can end. Either one party is stronger or both run out of resources. What about diplomacy? When we talk about the willingness to negotiate, we see that we hear statements from Putin saying the West is not willing to negotiate. We're hearing statements from the West saying Putin is not willing to negotiate. Do you really believe that the negotiation, the diplomacy card, is not playable in this conflict anymore?
Oh, good, Ben, I'll ask you to respond to that one as well, even though we're going to pass that down the line. So 30 minutes with Zelensky, your cheat sheet on President Trump.
So first of all, I would tell President Zelensky that the support he has in the United States is significant. Mm-hmm. And there are 330 million Americans, not one. Most of the Congress supports Ukraine. So don't lose hope that the U.S. will provide support. I would say he has got to work hard to regain the confidence of Ukrainian people. The reason there are millions of Ukrainians that are not in Ukraine but are in Germany and Poland, Romania, Switzerland, and France and other places is because many families are worried. They still have memories of the old Soviet prison army. And so they worry that their son or daughter will end up getting sent to the front without proper training, equipment, et cetera. They have made progress, but there still are vestiges of that. And I think this is the job of the president to regain the confidence of his own population. Don't go to Frankfurt and grab people and bring them back, but earn the confidence of families. I would also say, make it clear that Ukraine is open for business for defense industries that want to come into Ukraine. Rheinmetall is already doing this, BAE is doing this, a couple of others are. Make it as easy as possible for nations to contribute to Ukraine's growing defense industry. But of course, it has a reputation for corruption. When it was Ukroboronprom, it was awful. You know, he's worked hard to clean that up. He has to continue doing that. And the last thing I'd say, don't take a bad deal. Ukraine is winning this war on the battlefield right now. You are not under any pressure to take a bad deal where you cede territory, cede your sovereignty. And I think he's been very strong on that.
So your advice would be for him to say to Donald Trump, we have cards, and we're not going to cede anything prematurely.
Yeah, look, I have to say he is my president. He won the election, but he is not somebody that you can just sit there and convince. He'll go, oh, I didn't realize that, and then he'll change his mind. Remember that there are 330 million Americans. We got to get Americans realizing why it's to our benefit that Ukraine is successful. This is not charity. This is to our benefit on so many levels that they win. We've got to somehow change the American perception there.
That is, I think, the task of the moment, and it seems almost insurmountable, despite the fact that every survey shows exactly what you said. Christoph, the diplomacy question came up. We addressed it in the opening of this discussion, but resetting the table so that people are coming to the table in good faith with actually something to offer rather than something to manipulate in the, two steps away from the table, which is what we're seeing now.
Yeah. No, I mean, I totally agree. We always have to look for possibilities to come to a negotiated peace. And there have to be, and we have to try it. We have to, don't forget that so far Vladimir Putin has rejected to work with the Europeans. He has now said, well, he seems to be ready to work with the Ukrainians. Until now, he has said he doesn't recognize the Ukrainian president. I mean, the first thing is for Russia to recognize Ukraine, but this is his objective in the end. He doesn't want to have an independent Ukraine. He wants to either own it or have a puppet regime there. So we have to, but we always have to be ready to negotiate. On the other hand, and this is my experience, having been the advisor to the Chancellor when we did the Minsk agreement, where we really had a very clear path towards a diplomatic solution.
And Poroshenko was there.
Poroshenko was there.
And seen.
We asked, by the way, for every move, every paragraph, we asked for Poroshenko is in agreement with that, and it was a difficult negotiation, but we had a diplomatic path.
Right.
And then Putin just threw everything under the bus. So this is the question about now security guarantees. When I don't want to bore you, but 1994 Budapest Memorandum, we asked everybody around the table, Americans asked the Ukrainians to give up their nuclear weapons that were stationed on Ukraine at the end of the Soviet Union. And they did it, and they got the so-called Budapest Memorandum, where Russia, UK, US, China also endorsed it, guaranteed Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. So the Ukrainians were ready to give it up. And today, every Ukrainian says, how foolish were we to believe the Russians? And by the way, the one who said this is very important, the Russian ambassador to the UN, was a certain Sergei Lavrov, who is now saying, well, it's totally different something. So they're lying. and we need a position of strength. But I agree, we always have to try to find, can we go to the negotiating team? And I remind you that earlier on, I proposed that the Europeans get a package of military strong package together and say, okay, now we are ready to deliver Taurus, but if Putin thinks this may be bad for his Kerch bridge or something, then let's sit down and talk.
Mm-hmm. Commissioner Brunner, you were asked this difficult question on, is the refoulement policy, are these agreements with other countries not leading to other humanitarian disasters and potentially more security threats for Europe?
A clear answer, no. And we shouldn't mix up different things. We totally stick to fundamental rights, human rights. That's not negotiable. That's what I always say when we talk about the pact, implementing the pact, new legislation also when it comes to returns, for instance, and our new return regulation. Fundamental rights and human rights are not negotiable. That's for sure. That's the first point. But in the pact or in the also in the regulation, in the return regulation, there are so many safeguards, especially for that, and it hasn't been even implemented yet. So you can't say that there is a criminalizing NGOs with the pact. That doesn't make sense because the pact hasn't been implemented yet. So it's just not possible. We're not criminalizing anyone. It's the other way around, actually. We are finding safeguards also when it comes to new solutions. You're talking about Italy, Albania, for instance. That's where that's the courts, of course, to decide. But what we're doing with the return regulation is that we find possibilities for member states, always having safeguards, always respecting fundamental rights, human rights. We've even got a fundamental rights, not only an officer, but a whole department on fundamental rights at Frontex. We changed that 2 years ago. I'm sure you know that things in Frontex have changed with the new director there. There was a former director, I agree, who was a bit difficult, but he has left 2.5 years ago, and things have changed completely. So saying we are criminalizing NGOs with the pact, that is really something you shouldn't say, because we want to be fair, but we want to be firm as well, in order to respect the fundamental rights, yes, but also to protect our citizens when it comes to irregular migration. And when it comes to legal migration, that's something completely different. We need to find new ways, legal pathways also, to get the people into Europe, because we desperately need them for our labor market. So please don't mix those things up. What we see in the elections also in the European Union, not only in Germany, but also in Austria and in other countries, that people need answers. Otherwise, they are moving into the far right. And that's what we have to prevent the member states for. And that's what we're doing. Being fair but firm, and showing solidarity to the countries who are most affected, Italy, for instance, but also asking for the responsibility they have. And that's what we're doing. And that's, if they stick to the pact, if they implement the pact, that's exactly what the member states do.
All right, we have time for 2 more questions. This is my blind side, so I want to make sure I get a question from this side of the room, right there with the purple tie, and then we'll come to you.
Hello, I'm Kay Gleske from Switzerland, and I just came back from Trias in Austria. I was a platoon leader of the military police grenadiers, and I think it was a true success from my side. I just want to quickly answer the question of whether we are happy or not. I think it solely depends on how wet and cold we are and how good is the food in the kitchen. So I want to turn the table to Lieutenant General Süssli and ask him of how much can we extend these collaborations like we had them with Austria and Germany while still being constantly perceived as a neutral state?
Great question. Thanks for that. And then we'll go our last question over here. Microphone's coming behind you.
Good evening. I'm Jonathan, Lufthansa Group. Very interesting to listen to you. One thing in this discussion of the readiness for defense that I'm missing here is, let's say, vision and innovation. And I think looking at a generation that has a hard time to stand up for their country, I feel like there's a lot of people willing to stand up for Europe, right? And part of the question goes to Mr. Brunner asking, is there a responsibility on the European level to formulate a vision for people, on the one hand, to build the security architecture that is becoming a common one, but also for people to stand up. And the second part goes more into the direction of Professor Heusgen, asking, when Ukraine war started, my first impulse was also, yep, time to stand up for my country. And I wrote an email to the armed forces saying, hey, I've got years of leadership experience, a pilot license, they must have something to do for me there. I got a reply 9 months later saying, well, here are the terms and conditions, quite limited. And I thought, okay, it might not be that urgent after all. Is there...
That has changed.
Yeah, right. Is there an urgency to find innovation in this? New models? On the side of studying models that bring more of a society into an armed forces? Is there an idea to be more innovative, not just go back to classical conscription, but also something that the Swiss models here say? I'm really missing these things in discussions because they're always so kind of top-down-ish, saying, yep, now please people come along, but there needs to be something new, right? Is there the sense of urgency? Is somebody taking care of that?
Great, we've got that point too. Lieutenant General Süssli. Is Switzerland still neutral if it continues to cooperate so widely with the rest of its European neighbors?
First of all, thank you for doing service, and thank you for having been in Austria. Neutrality law actually is quite clear and simple, so you must not directly support one side in a conflict. You must treat both sides the same, and certainly you must not sign contracts which might bring you in a situation where you're not neutral anymore. That's a bit simplified, sorry. But it gets complicated when it's about neutrality politics, and that's where the issue is. Switzerland is part of, even the Federal Council decided to do more cooperation with other countries, so we have the order to do it, which is very useful. We're going to do a lot more. We're going to sign the state partnership program with one of the US states. Actually, the US didn't let us know what state exactly, but they had said they approved our request. Then we're going to do more with Germany, with Austria. I just recently invited the Chief of Defense of Singapore to do more with Singapore. We're very much interested in small states, how they handle it. So there is more going to happen. But always, cooperation, it's always two sides. And like in every relationship, it's a give and take. And we have to be also clear on what we can give. Austria, we gave a lot in the past. They gave us back something. But there is more to be happening going forward.
Commissioner Brunner, where's our vision thing?
Yeah, definitely. Europe needs vision, but Europe also needs more self-confidence, a little bit, I would say. Years ago, my generation maybe, we saw Europe as we saw freedom, we saw peace. The next generation maybe saw freedom of movement. And what is your generation looking at? One person today told me that the new generation, your generation, is probably just seeing a tree, and that is Europe, and is just standing there. So it's something we take for granted in a way, which we shouldn't, and which we should definitely work on. We should stand on our own feet. We should be more self-confident, and on security, we should change our attitude, stand on our own feet here again and as well, and change our attitude, see security as a very important part of everything we do in the European Union.
Christoph, and then urgency and innovation. I mean, we have spoken here as if, in some respects, so granular, as if we have a lot of time, but maybe we don't. And then that requires a greater sense of urgency, but innovative capacity. And this is what the Ukrainians have done for us. But what are we doing on urgency and innovation?
I think, well, first of all, the defense industry, defense is very conservative, very structured and old-fashioned. It's difficult to change.
House is on fire.
But I think there is the political readiness now. Minister Pistorius has the idea, I think, that basically the Lieutenant General just before described to go and write letters, not that you have to one, but that you receive one and say, by the way, are you interested? What are your capabilities? And this is what we offer. Right. That we get these young kids that know, more on technological issues, see how drones work, electronic warfare, cyber. I mean, people, we need these people, and I think to approach the society with this, have a discussion on that, I think works. What is a good sign, and I want to end also on something positive. We are going to a certain degree back to the times of the Fulda Gap of our, where we put our troops on the front. The German armed forces now put a brigade into Lithuania, and to actually do what we did in the past. And what I understand is that there are enough volunteers who say, we want to do it, we want to go there, we see a sense in doing it, and so I see this very positively.
Ben, do you have anything to add?
Just that, I live in Frankfurt in West End. I love living in Frankfurt, but all my neighbors, whenever I say, come on, Germany, you have got to lead, they go, oh, Germany, the L word, we can't do that. And so I said, look, you don't have to say we're the leader and wave a flag. Be the leader. Lead by example. I mean, think of your favorite football club. Probably the real leader on the team is not the loudest person, but the one that always delivers, that always shows up. And I think this is a role for Germany that is, the potential is there, and you lead by example in terms of Einsatzbereitschaft, unleashing the talent and innovative capabilities of industry, and also open up for more women to come into the Bundeswehr. I think Germany is about 20 years behind the United States on allowing women to serve.
So our panel was called Left Outside Alone. You've heard from this panel that what Europe has most in terms of its strength, its potential capacity, its innovative role is itself. Outside partners, I want to conclude, because you notice that I have danced around the proverbial elephant across the Atlantic quite deliberately because I wanted to focus on what we can do. But in 20 seconds or less, each of you, how do we keep the United States in the conversation about European security and deterrence? Commissioner Brunner.
Well, first of all, I think we have to keep on talking to the US, definitely. But we have to be quite firm on how we react, be it trade or being security. Doesn't actually matter. But we should still cooperate and communicate with them, especially when it comes to the exchange of data. I think we both need that, both the US and Europe. And as a European Union, as Europe altogether, we should look at other regions as well, other partners as well. And we have to wake up and to look at other possibilities, opportunities, I would say, also in different countries. And I think those regions, other regions in the world, they desperately want to cooperate with us because they know that Europe is a stable haven, I would say, with a lot of disadvantages, but a lot of disadvantages.
That's 22 seconds.
Sorry.
Lieutenant General Süssli.
I'm not going to comment on the political side, but I think Europe and US, we still share the same values. And also we as Swiss, we also share the same values. That's one thing. The other thing is Europe wants to spend 800 billion until 2030 on military. European defense industry is not capable enough, so we will have to spend in the US. I also think US is very much interested in doing business.
Business, right. Christoph, Heusgen, the MSC's just opened an office in DC, I noticed 2 days ago. Is that the way to do it? Is that one way?
Well, I think it's good. I agree. We have to, hope for the best and work and offer and buy weapons but prepare for the worst in case the U.S. turns away.
Is the White House going to listen, General Ben?
Quit whining about the U.S. I mean, really, I'm so tired of hearing Europeans like, oh, the U.S., what are we going to do? You have the same economic power, the bigger population, more potential. Act like that. Act like that. Make the U.S. regret that we are ruining these relationships, and you will see that we will come back. There's 330 million Americans, not one. Now, there's 77 million that voted for Trump, but that still leaves 260 million other Americans. And I guarantee you there would not be 77 million vote for him again don't give up on us.
All right, keep the faith. Europe not alone. Europe with one another, Europe with other allies. Now, we heard earlier from Jonas how important it is to be fed and hydrated at this conference so that these conversations can continue. So I have one last bit of logistical information for you. Join me in flipping over your name badge, because on the back of your name badge is where you are going to dinner. If you have a yellow badge, you are going to the India dinner. Your shuttle to the India dinner leaves outside in the pickup area between 7 and 7:15. Do not be late. If you have a red badge, you are going to the Singapore dinner. 7:20 is when you get on the transportation out there. If you have a blue badge, if I'm not totally mistaken, you're going to the flat parties, but you might be able to allocate yourself to one of the dinners here. And if you have the remaining badge color, which I've now forgotten but could look up, you are staying right here and you are enjoying the ISC hospitality right here on campus. And with that, enjoy your evening, your conversations, particularly the intergenerational ones. Join me one more time in thanking my panel.